Morning, everyone. I'm Patrick Barnes. I'm very delighted to be here. I'd like to thank MINEX for throwing me this birthday party. All of you coming. I won't tell you how old I am today, but
happy birthday.
Thank you. So I'm head of metals and mining consulting for Wood Mackenzie for this region, which covers Europe, Africa, Middle East, Russia, and Caspian, including Central Asia. Wood Mackenzie, for those of you who don't know, is a data and analytics company and a consulting company that covers full natural resources and energy value chains. And within that, I'm from the consulting side of the business, and we have a number of offerings that help private and public sector clients make their strategic decisions. That's not what we're here to talk about today, but I'll be talking about some of the things that we see, some of the insights that come from our ESG advisory practice. This is an example just to show you the number of things that governments have to keep in mind when they're looking at their mining policy in a number of categories. All of these need to be aligned with strategy, and it's very easy to get misaligned and with results that are not optimal. I've had the privilege of working on these topics with a number of private and public entities around the world, including some of these with some of our friends here from SRK. A number of places, including several projects in Central Asia specifically. But I'd like to begin today talking a little bit more about the market. As we all know, prices have calmed from the more euphoric days of the Chinese field boom, and we're looking now at a much more moderated or calm moment. The outlook is steady, but what we're seeing is that supply is coming online. At the same time, demand is cooling. The resulting impact on prices is that they're likely to remain fairly subdued compared to what we've seen in the past. But despite that, new capacity needs to come online. And it needs to start coming online now in order to hit in the 5 years down the road that it takes to develop and finance and construct a mine. And a lot of that is underpinned by energy transition requirements. So that demand is there, and now is a perfect moment to think about policy reform and getting ready to surf that next wave, because it will come, and it's coming sooner than we may think. And it's often a good idea to get prepared now while cooler heads prevail, rather than the shorter term urgent pressures of a high-priced environment. Now, there's a separate session later today that'll talk a little bit more about finance, but I'll just say enough here to say that while the financing crunch has eased slightly, the competition for capital is going to remain quite intense. Whether you're looking at junior equity capital only, TSXV is a good proxy for that, or the total mining industry, financing global, including equity and debt. What you're looking at is an increasing intensity of focus on ESG factors, including carbon footprint of metals themselves, government take, distribution of benefits, and how responsible the mining sector is in the place where you're looking to finance. And I'll just focus here on my key conclusion, which is that where policy or performance end up falling short in these areas by companies and governments, those companies and countries may be left behind in what we all hope will be the responsible mining age. So I'll just take one example of that. Here I'm showing our outlook from our database of the possible copper projects. These are the global copper projects that come online and approximately how fast they could come online. We worked with our sister company Maplecroft, which is also owned by Verisk, to assess each one of those tons against a number of risks. On the left, we're seeing civil unrest risk, climate change risk in the middle, resource nationalism risk, and you see that the nature of those risks varies quite significantly, as well as the severity between countries. And while civil unrest is the biggest one here, you see 67% of projects facing high risk in that area. You see some really acute risks in the other areas, but all three of these are affected both directly and over the longer term by how responsible mining decides to be today in terms of policy and performance. But it's, so those new tons are definitely needed. I've shown just the copper tons, but every commodity looks similar. The prize is really, really great. if you look at the left-hand side of this, you can see the contributions that mining can give to a country are exactly the things that governments are looking for pretty much anywhere, at any stage of development of their country. GDP, jobs, state income, foreign investment, exports. Mining is uniquely able to provide rural development and opportunities away from cities. And for especially energy-based economies, industrial diversification can be achieved to a certain degree through mining. Now you can't get the left-hand side unless you get the right-hand side done, which are the enablers that need to be in place in a sustainable way. By that we're talking, I've got them ranked here by increasing order of influence that governments have over those factors. And what you can see is you get down to fiscal regime and regulatory and institutional framework, they have a very high degree of influence over those factors. Now, knowing that, why is it so hard? The world is continues to see a flurry of changes and adjustments to mining codes and other reforms as countries struggle to figure out what's fair and struggle to adjust to changing conditions. That means there's a high degree of interest, but it's very difficult. Here, some of these can be viewed as favorable to investors, others as unfavorable, but it's something that requires a constant attention and improvement. Now, I mentioned a minute ago that it is difficult, and why it's hard can be summed up by saying that the attributes of mining make it uniquely difficult for shareholders and financing entities. I've categorized that into 4 key issues here. There are more, but the 4 key ones in our opinion are high degree of exploration risk. What you obviously need to have in place to combat that, when you have less than 1% of prospects becoming actual mines, is you need countries and companies need a portfolio of opportunities, and there needs to be enough upside for investors to stick through those challenging and somewhat crazy odds. Let's be honest, mining sector junior people are somewhat certifiably crazy to take on those odds. But they do so if there's enough upside to justify it. On the CapEx, which is highly intense, and that's just the nature of the business, what that requires is typically a high dependence on foreign and especially private capital. Long development times also make things difficult financially, and that requires stability and rule of law, among other factors. And socially, a ton of people are affected in a visceral and very emotional way, and in a very life-changing kind of way, as we've seen in many places. And the other reality is we have literally thousands of years of underperformance by both sectors and governments in the mining sector that needs to be overcome in order to get better policy, better performance, and better perception, which will trail the other 2. But it can be done. Here I'll take one example that I had the chance to live in Ecuador. Ecuador is a highly prospective country, maybe in the state's top 5. When we arrived there about 5 years ago, what we were seeing is the copper and gold mines in Ecuador, their prospects were extremely competitive on the cost curve. Nevertheless, when you actually run through a financial model, they were getting very, very non-competitive performance on IRRs. This is taking a mine in Ecuador and running it through a bunch of tax jurisdictions. And what you see is they were drastically worse than other countries in terms of what companies take home. And as a result, Ecuador ends up very far to the right in terms of how mine production compares to other countries, despite being highly prospective. So you have is the Ecuadorian government was basically trying to get a very large slice of a non-existent pie. And that was clearly a problem that yields no benefits to the country. And you could argue that the net impact of mining in the country was negative, because the only thing that was present was artisanal and small mining, which was not really delivering any of the key attributes that I was mentioning before. So that's a huge job, and they're still early into their recovery from that situation. But just talking a little about what we did with them in fiscal strategy, if you actually use data analytics, you can try to figure out what's the right balance with some kind of informed information. Just one example here, what we did is we took, the global database of projects. So what if all those were in Ecuador? How competitive would those be in its tax jurisdiction? You play with that tax policy, and you can actually look at optimizing the overall government take from the sector rather than from any one mine. When you look at that, assuming that the global portfolio of projects is similar to the ones in Ecuador, which it probably is, you can actually start to see what the right optimal tax benefit is. And on the light blue line, you can see investors take home also has to be taken into account, because otherwise you don't get enough of an IRR for us to assume those projects got off the ground, which is our filter here. Just one example, but in an increasingly complex world, which is what we're facing, the winners are going to be those who actually can make sense of that chaos and understand the counterparties and all stakeholders in a much more disciplined and, to the extent possible, quantitative way. Because all those solutions have to be rooted in that grasp. It has to be something that really works for all parties in order to be sustainable, where you just continue to get fluctuations back and forth. And those policies need to take into account the cycles. So I'll finish here by saying that I did mention already these key industry pressures on the right, these four main sectors of exploration, risk, etc. But it's also important for companies to think about the pressures that are on governments, which in many cases are quite different. If you're a minister, and I've been in a bunch of these meetings with them, you have an acute need to defend some pretty complex decisions to a lot of people standing there with a knife pointed at your back, whether it's political pressures from the public or from other ministers or the presidency. You have limited financial resources, which tends to make you move slower than you'd like. You have short political cycles, which are completely incongruent with mining development cycles and leads to some kind of conflicts of interest to a certain extent. And you have the weight of all the social responsibility on your shoulders. So to finish up, as I mentioned, it's a very complicated situation. The potential really is huge. Mining, I firmly believe, has incredible potential to improve the lives of the world, and it's a key part of the energy transition that needs to be in place. Time is of the essence because other countries and companies are competing for that same scarce capital. And I firmly believe that in the coming years, more than in the past even, responsible mining areas and companies are going to be those that are able to compete successfully for that capital. ESG performance has to be there, and economics have to remain there in order to continue to attract investors so that they don't just invest in technology or other factors. In my mind, this is really fun stuff. There's no more exciting thing to be part of in the world than trying to get this right. And thank you very much for the time. I look forward to talking with you more throughout the rest of this conference, and please contact me if you'd like to talk about it at any point in the future. Thank you very much.